Hello, I'm Sean Murray, and this is The Conversation, where we take an alternative look at political events and current affairs through an Irish lens. In this show, we hope to pick, probe, investigate and uncover the stories that you want to hear. We go where mainstream won't go. This week, we look at one of Ireland's great political artists, a man that not only dedicates his work to his social and political surroundings, but has also been imprisoned for his political beliefs. But before we do, let's get a quick overview on this week's topic.
Art is a powerful form of non-violent protest in any struggle for social or political change. For many countries affected by colonial violence, self-expression through the medium of street art has been both a way to galvanise the populace as well as challenging state censorship. During apartheid, South African artists used graffiti and other creations of street art as a means of protest and resistance against the oppressive racist regime. Similarly, in Latin America, the street art scene emerged to combat censorship and safeguard hard-won basic human rights and political freedoms. One of the most lauded of all street artists, Banksy, has dedicated much of his work to the ongoing struggle of the Palestinian people. The artist owns a boutique hotel in Bethlehem called the Walled Off Hotel, which is situated at the wall dividing occupied Palestine. A symbol of protest as well as an exhibition for tourists. Banksy's work has now become synonymous with the Palestinian struggle and has many parallels to the murals of resistance that have been displayed in solidarity throughout the north of Ireland, both during and after the conflict. In Belfast, the International Wall has been a symbol of such solidarity and has recently seen the entire wall dedicated to the Israeli-US genocide that has been inflicted on the people of Gaza. During the conflict, many seen the murals of resistance that adorned the walls of houses and working class areas in the north of Ireland as a necessary form of self-expression under an intense period of British censorship. In a society monopolised by the British narrative, the international cameras that arrived were often struck by the creative ingenuity of the young artists. Today, Belfast in particular has become a thriving hub for political tours centred around the work of local street artists. The TV cameras have been replaced by iPhones and DSLRs, but the imagery of resistance and international solidarity has remained the same.
With that, I'd like to introduce my next guest. Danny Devenny began to experiment with forms of protest political art while he was imprisoned as an IRA volunteer during the 1980s. While his early work reflected the social and political themes of the Irish conflict, his contemporary work has expanded to other international conflicts, no more so than the current genocide being visited upon the Palestinian people. Danny, welcome to the show.
How are you doing, Sean?
So first of all, Danny, can you tell me a bit about your childhood growing up?
It's like a Catherine Cookson novel. My father was from Gaol. He and his brother came up here as young teenagers to work for the McMahon family, the infamous family who were slaughtered in a sectarian attack. And in 1921, my uncle Jim was actually involved in a sectarian attack, where as a barman he was shot by loyalist paramilitaries. But he survived and ended up met my Aunt Jean from Sandy Row. My father then met a lady from this side of town, from the Ardown area, and he had 6 children. I think because of the compensation they got for the shooting, they were able to buy themselves, Jim and my father Con, bars in Belfast. My father's bar was in Durham Street, where he and his first wife had 6 children. Unfortunately, she was very ill. In those days, childbirth was a very dangerous process, and my granny sent down to Donegal for someone to come up to look after my father's first wife and the children. And she sent a we'd call her Mara Beag Du, wee Black Mary Lafferty. Unfortunately, my father's first wife passed away giving childbirth. She and the child died. So although my mother was up looking after the children before that, she and my father ended up jumping the broomstick. Together they had another 10 children. So I wasn't joking when I said it's a Catherine Cookson novel. So 16 of us in the family. Both my parents are from Donegal. We ended up leaving Durham Street, and when I was only a child, and moving to God's country, Short Strand.
So at what age did you aspire to be becoming an artist?
All from the very word go, from when I was at primary school. I mean, my friend in school, Jimmy Lundy, told me I was a great artist when the teacher gave us crayons one day, but I've always just loved this, and it came naturally to me. I mean, my brother Gaol and I would sit, and our lives coincided with the rise of sort of pop music and rock and roll and the Beatles, sort of. So we were 10-year-old when the Beatles came on the scene, and we sort of sit at night drawing those. We're copying stuff from comics, as kids do today. So, I mean, I always got sort of people saying, you are good at what you do. So I've always just loved it, and I thought it's brought me on an easy path through my life. One of the great stories I tell, and you're asking me about political stuff, creating political imagery started when I was arrested and ended up in Crumlin jail in early 1973. And unbeknownst to me, Big Shane said, well, it got me a cell. When we were being arrested trying to rob a bank for the IRA, I was shot and had to go to Musgrave Park Hospital. So I was a few weeks after Sid and Jim, my other friend, Jim Ferris, being charged and brought to the Crumlin jail. But when I arrived, Sid had a cell waiting for me. And 3 or 4 days later, there was an escape from the prison. And it was Jim Bryson. And unfortunately, Malik McCarry as well, but Malik got caught, didn't get away. Jim got away. And the next day, one of Jim's best friend and sort of a famous person in our Republican culture is Tommy Tolan from Ballymurphy. And the door opened and Tolan says, here, you Danny, yeah, here you can do a bit of drawing, yeah, can you do that for me? And it was the front page of the telly calling on the arrest of Jim Bryson and a lovely front face photograph of Jim. So I did told her a hanky, sort of just with a ballpoint pen, wanted, blah, blah, blah. And within a couple of days, told her I was back again with a whole pile of hankies. She said, Don, can you do these for me as well? So since then, I believe I haven't stopped. We used to have a little page stuck to my cell wall of all the next ones. That's where I first met Bobby. He came in and asked me to do a hanky for his young son, I think he had just been born. And that little list on my wall has never ended. Because I'm even at the present talking to you, I'm doing stuff for Big Blute. I'm supposed to be doing a bin for him. So I've just continued doing that stuff.
And were there any influences at an early age? Or like, did you look towards other artists?
Pop art, all pop art. I mean, as a kid, talk about drawing the Beatles. I mean, you know, all the sort of superhero comics, the Batman, the Superman. Andy Warhol particularly. I'm not too much into sort of the traditional type art, but Andy Warhol. And I realised what he was trying to say from the very start. You know, you didn't have to go to college to become an artist. In fact, the Native Americans believe that we all are artists. We just are waiting the opportunity to release that, and I totally believe that.
And what galvanised you about political art?
Well, the story I told you about Jim Bryson, and then I'm in prison now, and we had political status thanks to Billy McKee and the men of 1972 who carried out that campaign to force the British to accept that the people going to prison now were a result of the political conflict which they had instituted in our country. So in 1974, unfortunately, we started to hear about comrades in England, the conditions they were living under. A bit like you see how Muslim people of Arab background were being treated over the last few years with the conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, we hear the real stories now, how they were victimised and abused, even just before they went to prison, and particularly in prison, they became not only the target of the prison regimes, but also fellow prisoners for the hatred that was laid upon them by the Sun and the Star and places like that. So we were listening to all this stuff, and it was quite difficult for us to listen when we were having visits on a regular basis. We were able to have our own education classes, our own televisions and snookers, pool tables and stuff. While these prisoners were being brutalised and victimised, just asking for it to be recognised and returned to serve their prison sentences, not for release, to serve their prison sentences back here in Ireland. When Michael Gahan went on hunger strike, I'm not sure why we were asked or ordered, but I mean, we say ordered in jail, it's being asked because we're all part of the one family. People were writing letters to the newspapers to highlight what was taking place there. And people like me and a few others in jail we decided just try and come up with some imagery to send out to help the movement on the outside display or focus attention on what the demands of our comrades were. So I ended up designing a few posters and send them out, and the movement then printed. Through another friend and a short strand man, a great man. I mean, Harry Thompson, who I knew before I went to prison, in fact, that's probably what I'm thinking about it now, is the first bit of political art, because I remember in 1972, 4 of our local volunteers were killed in action, and one of our prisoners had sent out a hanky commemorating their passing. The usual stuff, the hanky with the crossed armour lights and stuff. The artwork had been finished before Big Men and Joy and Eddie and them had been killed, had lost their lives. That was Anderson Street. And Harry came to me and asked me, could I add those names to their hanky, which was dedicated to Wee Dinger Bell and the lads who were killed in February. But then Harry, because he had got word, because people sort of, even all my friends growing up in the district, we all run about the Guard, Devenny, Macho, Spoon. They all through my life, they used to say, he's the artist. We were actually down in Galway in 71, just before or 72 was it? And God rest him, there was John Boy McComb's gone, I mean, Spoon's gone, these were all part of the company. And they were saying, Danny, we're running out of money. And they wanted me to do, could you not go over and get some chalk and start drawing on the pavement, we'll earn a few bob. So.
And did you do it?
No, it didn't, I was too drunk. But
I thought we were going to get a Picasso moment there, because he done the same.
Harry realised that he could use me, and I was very willing to help in any way possible to help if it was going to support of the movement, particularly on the prison issue. So I would send him out. He asked me to do illustrations for postcards and stuff. And then this strange character came into our cell one day, myself and D. Delaney, big skinny lad with a beard. He announced himself. I said, you've been reading this stuff in the Republican News, haven't you? I go, oh yeah, that old man Brownie, is it? He says, well, he's not an old man, it's me. So his garage himself was Jerry, who's obviously Ballymurphy, and he'd been in our cell because him and Dee were best friends. And he explained to us that it was actually he who was writing the Brownie articles, which we were all reading weekly after it was smuggled into the prison. And he said, is there any chance of you, could you illustrate those for me? I said, what do you mean? He said, I'll give you them once I've written them, and then I want you to just drop a wee, whatever suits you, a cartoon or whatever, to illustrate the piece, because we all know, I mean, an image speaks more than 1,000 words. So I started off doing that, I think, about 1975. I don't know why he did this, and I hate him for it, but he says, I hope you don't mind, but I've named you, your cartoons. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you have to have a name for the cartoon that's going in with the Brownie piece. Flossie. Flossie. I went, what? No, he says, I can't change it now. That's the way it is. We were allowed in the cages to create our own discussions and debates and stuff. Different projects, apart from creating the Irish language, Gael talk. We also had regular debates, I think on a weekly basis, as well as lectures on sort of military stuff, arms and things. And there's a great story there. It's another Toadler story, talking about my political art. Toadler came in one day, he says, he'd got the job as a training officer in the cage. So his job was to teach all the other volunteers how to use weapons and sort of explosives and stuff. He said, I want to do a lecture on an AK-47. An AK-47, we were reading the newspapers, the Vietnam War was going on. So we're wondering, that's an amazing weapon. Look at it there, and you see the close-up photographs of it in the Sunday Times sort of weekend magazine. And he says, I want you to draw, I'm going to do a lecture on it, sort of stripped-down version of it. And I go, are you crazy, Toby? No, Don, you just do as I tell you, and we'll do it. So I sat with him for about a week, I think. And if you know him, the crack was 90. Well, we ended up producing, and he was able to give lectures on it. And according to when I got back outside again, it was absolutely smack on what he was able to create by just showing me what to do. So that's a side story, but as well as that, this was the period then coming into 76 and the whole advent of the removal of political status. And we were obviously having discussions, debates on that. So again, to help at the outside, I would come up with ideas and produce ideas for posters. I think one of the first posters they used in the campaigns, the relative action committees, was one of my artworks, Political Status, and I'd based it on a drawing. And obviously because we were talking about Irish history, it's funny when I look back on this, because this is before the blanket protest. I look back at the poster and go, why did I paint that guy naked in a cell? because that's even before Kieran had refused to put on the president.
Before the blanket protest?
Yeah. This is like mid-76. And you'll see that, I see them now and go, I did that. I wonder what was in my head to think that out. Obviously what was in my head was we were politicised people, Irish people here from right across the island, discussing our own history and what the possibilities would be, and the literacy of the British trying to enforce a criminal badge on an Irish prisoner. So we had learned about Sean McCoy in previous hunger strikes, and we knew there's no way our people are going to do that. Unfortunately, but they're heroes now today, but I was personal friends with them. People who end up leading that campaign in the Hayes Blocks, who were released in '76 before me. When they started releasing the sentenced prisoners due to the introduction of 50% remission at the start of '76, I was released at the very end of '76, Christmas, '76 and into '77. And within those few months alone, not only had several comrades lost their lives in action, Joey Serger had been one of them, Danny Lennon be another one, but my friends like Tom Boylouden, Sid Walsh, Bobby himself, and many, many others were all back in prison again by the time I was released. So these were people who had been discussing what the possibilities of what was they think we all thought was going to come. I got out and reported back right away. Somebody had a bit of smarts about them as a response to the ongoing discussions we were having among ourselves. And Bobby again put words to it. Everyone has a role to play, no matter how big, no matter how small. And that came out of it. I'll talk to you later on, because you said earlier you wanted to talk about my interest in Palestine and what was happening there. The recognition that armed struggle alone was not going to bring us to victory. When I was then asked, look, come here, we want you, we know you've got a talent in creating stuff like that, imagery and things, we want you to take over as the designer of Republican News. So in 1977, apart from me meeting Deborah and getting married, that was the start of that, kicked off the start of that new year. And it was funny because I remember when I think one of my older sisters, Molly or one of those, heard that I was taking on the role of designer for Republican News for the Sinn Féin Republican movement. She said, "That's great, Danny, because because I worry about you, and that means you'll not go to jail again and you'll not be shot again." Well, I went to jail again within a year in 1978 when Roy Mason tried to close us down and arrested us all. And I was shot again in 81, so I got that wrong.
Just moving on a bit, I mean, your work, although it was based on your political surroundings, your jail time, but you then had a focus on other international struggles, no more so than the Palestinian struggle. Tell me a bit about that, and I want this to lead on to the international wall and what you were doing then, the murals and stuff like that.
Discussing the ongoing scene internationally among ourselves in prison. And bear in mind, we were all sort of like 16, 17, I think it was the oldest, 19-year-olds going to prison. It was a very macho existence. I can tell you loads of stories about that, just how macho it was. When I went to prison, as I was saying earlier on, Big Shane said, had a cell ready for me. And as I arrived in the Crumlin Road prison in A-Wing, he says, "Come on quick, top of the pops is on up in the threes in the canteen." And we ran up, and as I went into the room, this crazy man dancing up and down the table in the middle of it all, right? And I go, "Oh, right." And these other guys then come in, and they're all like gangsters. One of them had a wee pig cap, and they went up to the front, and Pan's people came on. And all the guys in the front seats were all just lifted and threw off the front seats. And all these new guys who come into the canteen all sit down. And I was going to Sienna, "Who is that?" He says, "Dan there, it's okay, don't worry." I'm thinking I just fell into one of these parallel universe, like Hell's Angels sort of jail prisons that you see in America and stuff. That was my first night in Crumlin jail, and I was like thinking, oh my God, I've just been sentenced to 8 years, how am I going to survive this? The next morning, we're called out to a parade in the parade grounds in A-Wing, and I then recognised the crazy guy who was enjoying himself dancing to the music on the tables was our OC, no other than Tommy Gorman, right? Tommy. The guys who had been the bullies, it was Toddler and Bryson and McCarry and Honky Wilson and the team of them, and they were attacking young countrymen from Strabane. And Tommy said to them all, "Right, you think these were funny, messing people about last night? You don't bully people in here. You said brushing the yard for 2 weeks." And I thought, whoa, this is different, this is discipline. And to corn it off then, my first visit with my mother. Bearing in mind I hadn't even known Tommy at this stage. But as my mother came to sit down, Tommy approached from the side. And without prompt, he said, "Excuse me, you're Mrs. Devenny?" He says, "Yes." He says, "But don't you worry about your son. We'll look after him." And my mother went, and I went, "What?" And to me, that was sort of the richness of that. Just, I knew, I was the warmth of, I know I'm part of a family here. To this day, the enormous respect I've had for Tommy Gorman, and it's well deserved because he's a great man.
Then, of course, the Palestinian and the international stuff that came afterwards. So where, I mean, I don't need to ask you where that came from.
Well, it's an interesting point because, again, it's back to the adage of everyone has a role to play. And I started to talk there and get sidetracked, I'm sorry, about the Macho thing. But just to explain, I told that story there. There was a Macho thing. All the stories were about how many did you bombs did you, operations did you go on, how many did you do? This was the whole thing. And during the discussions, and again, we've been justifiably so because it was a war. But then we read about this Palestinian spokesperson, Hassan Kafani. He had already been killed, but we were reading in the books about him because many of the books that were being sent into us, information from left-wing groups, were written by Hassan Kafani himself. So Mossad had targeted him and sidetracked even military leaders of the PLO. We realised, hold on, if they think he's that important, he's their spokesperson. I mean, he is equally one of the strengths of their struggle. So it was almost an understanding. We have to create something like that as well. We have to create our own political machine. We have to create a machine that can spread our word across the world. And I think that influenced a lot of my contemporaries in realising, there are other roles to play within this struggle. And I think that's where Bobby coined the phrase, everyone has a role to play. Always having identified with that struggle, and again, as I say, my job then became sort of the designer of Republican News. And because of the similarities between their own conflict and ours, in the colonial struggle, the Brits creating division in another land, we have always kept and read up on what was going on. It's made it simplified for me then when I got involved with the murals many years later. I had produced murals in the prison as well as a few when I was first released from prison in 77 and 78. But when we realised the importance of the strength of this political medium, the wall paintings, it's a bit like when the Germans asked Picasso about Guernica. They asked him, "Are you responsible for this?" And his reply was, "No, you were." So I think my reason for starting to paint images about Palestine on our walls here, and I wasn't the first, there was many, Sean Morris and Marty himself and many people had created murals prior to that. But on this international wall, to give them space there, was inspired by that. When we were trying to tell our story, we had to battle against the British censorship taking place against us, not only in the international press, but also in our local press here, where they could stop the advertisements and even the likes of the Irish News. We thought we must at least aid them in some way, because we had really realised very early on, the power of this wall art and how you can reach a wide audience. Because, as I explained to you, my job as a designer of Republican News was not just the weekly paper, it also was designing all our magazines, all our news sheets, all our papers, all our posters. And I realised very early on the simplicity of the mural, because Danny Morrison had introduced me to all the local wee artists along the Lower Falls and stuff, Marty and Kez and all your friends and Marty's friends. These are all the kids, Jackie Burt, who started the murals in sort of the west of the city. And I actually stole them all and had them all working for me, for Sinn Féin and for the newspaper. But they were creating some stuff. And I remember back in the day when I was still designing the stuff, a lot of the imagery I was creating, they were in painting them onto the walls. Danny Morrison would come to me and say, "Look, the kids want to do another mural, they've got paint and stuff, can you come up with an idea for them?" So we became lifelong friends. In fact, myself and Marty are almost family. Back then, when I was doing the posters, you would have to come up with a design for a poster, spend 1 or 2 days designing it. Then you would have to deliver that to the committee, who would then have to decide. And you know, the old adage, designed by committee, I mean, they destroy the idea and you're having arguments, and this goes on for a couple of weeks. Then when everybody's satisfied, you go to the printer. And the printer asks a quantity, gives you a price. So say it's £300 for 2,000 posters. You then have to get 20 or 30 people to go and put all these posters up. Whereas with a mural, I then discovered, you get a couple of tins of paint, you go and paint your political image on the wall. If people don't like it, well, that's up to themselves, right? But all these photographers come along, and all these newspapers come along, and even if they're spilling a yarn, they create an enigma, because lots of times, particularly when the international crews would come here to Belfast, and I realised then, the wee crews you have standing around helping you to create this piece you're doing now, the camera people and people like that, they come from an artist background. They're not interested in the politics of it all or what the person is saying. I'm only saying they probably are interested in you, Sean, but in most cases, they're just there to create an image for their television. And what they were doing was putting the spokesperson who has been given all this information by the British Northern Ireland office, these lies that there's no support for the Republican struggle, there's no support for Sinn Féin and their gangsters and all this nonsense. But the wee guy on the camera going, like somewhere nice to put him, stand him in front of a big gable wall saying, support Sinn Féin, up the IRA, support that. And many people have come to me sort of down the years from other countries, America particularly, saying that's why I got interested in what was happening in Ireland, because it was a total enigma. The guy in front was saying, like, the IRA are gangsters, but there behind him was a beautiful big mural. Sometimes a beautiful big Celtic mural where you realise, you know, there must be a big tradition building there, a strong tradition. Particularly during the time of the brutality against our prisoners in the run-up to the hunger strikes of 1976 to the early 80s. Bobby had also a saying, the men of art have lost their heart. Well, these kids that I met, Marty Lyons and people like that, were painting from the heart. They were painting what they were hearing, the stories they were hearing about their uncles and their aunts in Armagh jail, and telling the world what was happening. And thanks to the television crews, even if they were telling lies, we got our story across the world.
Well, I think that's where the power in the murals were, particularly during the conflict. It was during a period of sustained censorship, and the broadcasters had that monopoly. But the broadcasters carrying those cameras in these areas, they couldn't inform an outer audience, an international audience, the full picture, because the imagery told a different story. And it was very, very difficult. They couldn't censor that. It definitely was a powerful medium that spoke out, you know.
Just to confirm what you've just said there, myself and Marty were over on the Armour Road, because regularly we'd be invited over, we just volunteered, just go over ourselves into communities like that, like the Armour Road or Gravahi Road, where people didn't realise the tension built up. I come from the Short Strand, so I'm well aware of what tension is built up in the run-up to these sectarian marches. So in the days and weeks beforehand, there's a feeling in the community, by young people particularly, you know, is what's going to happen here. There's going to be riots and stuff. People are going to get hurt. People are going to get arrested. So we would go over and work with them and get them involved in painting stuff. I mean, reroute the flute, we'll paint it on a gable wall and get the kids painted and stuff like that. But I'd seen this cartoon in, I think it was the Dublin Star or something like that, and it was around the time of Mo Mullen allowing the Orange Marches parade up the Gravahi Road. And it was Mo Mullen washing her hands like Pontius Pilate over a dead cartoon of a Catholic lying on the ground, and an arrow saying, pointing by the police and the army, the correct route, which is over the bodies of nationalists. Unfortunately, it did come true, that horrifically. But so I thought, this is an image to put up here, because you've got all the camera crews from all over the world, France, America, Spain, England, all focused on this. They were hoping for a bit of, sensationalism, TV crews, they love sort of the rats. I said, Marty, let's do that cartoon. We painted it just on there beside the bridge on the Armour Road. And the next day, the main journalist, he came over and he says, excuse me, Danny, isn't it? I says, yeah. He says, could we do an extended interview with you? And I was going, like, why? What about? He says, because yesterday when you were painting, we filmed that on time lapse, and that was syndicated right across the US yesterday. He says, how many people do you reckon seen that? I goes, I don't know, thousands. He says, 40 million. And to me, the penny drop is realised the power of this political art which we're creating. So from then, we then intentionally, realising that, we specifically created images that could be seen at a glance, and the simplest message, the simplest image, get it out there.
The part for me with the murals was you were able to reappropriate what the broadcasters were trying to do. So they would come in, as Ed mentioned, they would have come in to have their own narrative on the story, but they couldn't censor what the images were in the streets, and no matter what way they tried to shape that, it was almost impossible for them.
There was also a little byproduct to it all. I realised that early on too, to the murals, and I think people are starting to realise it now, but back then people seen it as peculiar. In any other conflict in the world, you don't have murals while the conflict is ongoing. You have slogans on the walls. El Salvador, Nicaragua, Portugal. After conflict has been resolved to some extent, then you start seeing the murals. Our kids were painting those murals in the middle of the conflict. They were putting in defiance of what the British were trying to do. And they were realising, some of those kids, we all, as young teenagers, when we were forced by circumstances around us, by politics bequeathed to us by previous British governments, we all joined the IRA. And because of Bobby's adage, you didn't necessarily have to take up an arm race or become a bomb maker to assist the struggle. You could be working in other fields. And I think that those young kids in 1979, 1980 realised there's other stuff for them to be getting on with. I think that they proved how powerful art can be. And it made sense to me because we had the opportunity to go to prison and study and read books and have lectures and debates. But like some Marty, people like that who weren't arrested, I was going to say, didn't have that opportunity. They didn't want to go there. I didn't want to go there. But who missed that? And even ourselves, I wasn't politicised by reading books about James Connolly. I was politicised before that and wanted to read books about James Connolly. But I was politicised by people, musicians, artists, Bob Dylan, the Beatles, people like that who are sending out statements to us. And the most famous one of all is Muhammad Ali. Do you know what I mean? Muhammad Ali standing up there for the black man, but sure, because the culture we grew up with was the British culture of, looking down on people of a different colour of skin and the racist nature. I'm not going to say it now to you, but the words that we were using to describe people. And when we had sort of in the 60s, I grew up during that era of the whole hippie era and sort of music. Black is beautiful. Before that, the black person, black woman was a wee maid in an American film somewhere who just had nothing to say. Whereas black was beautiful, these beautiful models singing beautiful songs. So I think that politicised us. So it's proved to me, and again with the murals, I wasn't surprised how this can change or influence people's opinions about what our struggle was about as well.
And that it has done, and I think that when the story is written about the struggle and the contemporary conflict that happened here, I think your art is a big part of that mosaic, I have to say, Don. And we're all proud of you in this.
What you have to do there, Sean, is thank yourselves, because we keep telling people we're not sort of geniuses and stuff. All we do is we listen to you in the bar. Well, we wouldn't listen to you.
I'll be listening to
you in the taxis, in the community groups. And what we were doing is reflecting what was happening. Contemporary politics in our community was reflected on our walls. And that's right down the years, because tourists and foreigners would ask us, no one attacks your murals. Is that because the IRA threatens them if a paint bomb or something? I says, no. It's because we were saying what the people want us to say.
A whole great sense of pride within the community.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Even during the conflict, at the most demoralising of times, those images were a great moral.
That's a very interesting point, because Bobby's mural.
Bobby Sands' mural you're referring to.
Yeah, Bobby's mural, but not only the mural, but that particular photograph of Bobby. There's a story behind that. And like when we realised, again, the power of the image, as he said earlier, about an image speaks more than 1,000 words. But I remember when I was first released from prison and working on Republican News, there were other campaigns with our English prisoners, particularly with the Birmingham 6 unjustly tried innocent men. But I remember the newspapers having these photographs of our prisoners. And they were like ugly mugshots. They looked like Al Capone, their faces were twisted. And to be quite honest, even as an Irish Republican going, holy moly, that does look like a murderer to me. Then years later, when I'm working for Republic News, we had some friends, journalists within these newspapers, English newspapers, and they sent us some of the photographs which those papers had printed. When we were doing a book, I think, about the special category A prisoners. And the photographs were totally different. They had been doctored by the graphic artists in their newspaper studios. So when our prisoners were going to go on hunger strike, even the first time when the doc was leading hunger strike, I mean, the importance was to get the best photograph of our prisoners, so that when we showing them there in the newspapers or passed them out internationally, you want the best photograph of them, that they just look like someone. Could be your neighbour, you could identify with that person.
To humanise
it
them.
Could be your cousin, you humanise them. And when it came to Bobby, Danny Morrison came to me, and he was in a bit of a twist. He said, Danny, Bobby was only released, was out for a few months. I said, I know that, Dan. He says, we have no photographs of him, and the family here have no photographs of him. Is there any chance you might have some from prison? And that night I went over and realised that Jared Rooney, who's Bob's best mate, and was the OC in the cages at the time, he might have some, but Jared was living down south at the time, or he might have been in prison again. And even to this day, I remember that calling Mrs. Rooney's house and saying, excuse me, Mrs. Rooney, would you have any of the old photographs of us, Jared, of us in prison? And she brought that selection out, and I seen that one of Bobby, and went, oh my God, this is special. So that became the photograph that we all used.
Probably one of the most iconic images, actually, of...
It's, yeah, and it's just him, because he did look like Rod Stewart, and we called him Rod. But the story is, when we painted that on the wall, McCarthy was the first one to paint it on the wall. He had come to me and said that the Shinners want me to paint something on the wall here, what do you think? And I had given him an image that I had created by some French artist off Bobby, like a silhouette image, and he used that one initially. At a later stage, I think they came down and says, you know, I think there was renovations on the wall. I went up and painted the coloured version, and I'm not sure even probably in McCarthy's first mural, but I've heard many people tell me the story afterwards, and we fixed it up ourselves. The British soldiers still in the streets would come along and attack that mural, more so than even the ones with guys standing with clutches. And I think, what the they're going past the ones with the guys firing the volleys over the coffins, and they're throwing paint bombs at this. This is squaddies in their sort of bases here, thinking, I'm going to fill a bottle with paint, so I'm going to go down tonight undercover and throw this paint bottle, like some kid from Liverpool who's joined the Brits, thinking to do that. I realised what it was. It was his smile. It was Bobby's smile of defiance. It was that smile, it was Bobby's defiance, and also when he wrote that famous poem, The Rhythm of Time, it's the thought that says, I'm right. They didn't like that. What can you say? You get emotional when you try to talk about it.
Well, Don, I want to thank you for coming in today.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we'll see more of you and keep up the great work.
Okay.
And that does it for Season 2. We'd love for you to join the conversation by sharing the link to today's programme to help us grow our audience across all our social media platforms. And once again, I'd like to thank our special guest, Danny Devenny. In the meantime, the conversation will be back in a few weeks with more investigations and analysis. I'm Sean Murray. Bye for now.